Amara woke up before the sun had fully risen. The soft light through her bedroom window made the room feel calm, but inside her there was a storm of excitement. Today was not just any day. Today was her first day as the new chief of the city's police department. She had dreamed of this moment for years. She had studied hard, worked long hours, and never gave up even when the path was difficult. She stretched and smiled at herself in the mirror. Her uniform was neatly pressed, her badge shining, and her shoes polished to perfection. She felt a mixture of pride and nervousness. She had a lot of responsibility now. She was not just another officer. She was the leader, and everyone would look to her for guidance. She wanted to make a positive change. She wanted the department to become stronger, fairer, and more connected to the community. After a quick breakfast, Amara grabbed her keys and stepped outside. The morning air was crisp and fresh. Birds chirped as she walked to her car. She thought about the meetings she would have, the plans she would share, and the officers she would meet. She knew some of them might be surprised to see a woman in the chief's position. Some might even doubt her at first, but she was determined to show them that respect and leadership came from wisdom, fairness, and confidence, not just rank. Meanwhile, Officer Thomas and Officer Kevin were on patrol. They had been working together for a few years and considered themselves very experienced. They liked to follow routines and had a reputation for being strict. Today, they had a small personal mission. They wanted to save a good parking spot for a friend who was visiting the area. They were not thinking about anything unusual or unexpected. Their minds were focused on the routine of their day. Amara drove carefully through the quiet streets. She knew the city was waking up slowly, with people heading to work, school, and shops. She reached a small cafe that she liked for its calm atmosphere and friendly staff. The smell of fresh coffee and warm pastries welcomed her as she parked her car. She smiled at the barista who already knew her favorite order. Today, she thought, she deserved a little treat before the busy day began. As she stepped out of her car, she noticed the parking lot was crowded. There were cars in every spot, and she accidentally blocked one of the spaces that Thomas and Kevin were eyeing. She did not notice them yet, and she was simply walking toward the cafe entrance with a bright smile and a confident step. She felt good, ready for the challenges and opportunities of the day. Thomas and Kevin saw her car and immediately assumed she was being careless. They had no idea who she was. To them, she was just another driver in their way. They exchanged looks and whispered to each other, planning how to handle the situation. They thought they could make her move by showing authority. They did not know that the woman they were about to confront was more than just another driver. Amara ordered her coffee and waited by the counter, checking her schedule for the day. She was excited to meet her team, to introduce herself, and to explain her vision for the department. She believed that strong leadership could inspire people, and she wanted to inspire her officers. She took a deep breath and felt a sense of calm mixed with energy. She was ready. At that moment, Thomas and Kevin approached. They were walking briskly and looked serious. Amara looked up, noticing them but not feeling intimidated. She thought they might just ask her to move her car politely. She did not expect anything unusual, and she smiled as she prepared to greet them. She believed in respect and communication, and she always approached situations with a calm mind and a friendly heart. Amara was enjoying the warm smell of coffee as she sipped slowly, letting the smooth taste wake her senses. She looked around the cafe and noticed people laughing, reading newspapers, and working quietly on their laptops. It was the kind of calm morning she liked before a busy day. She checked her watch and realized she still had a few minutes before heading to the police station. She wanted to make the most of this small moment of peace. Meanwhile, Officer Thomas and Officer Kevin had reached her car. They were frowning, frustrated that the space they had been saving for their friend was now blocked. They had no idea who the driver was, and their minds were filled with irritation. They exchanged a quick glance, silently agreeing that they would handle the situation quickly and firmly. They had done similar situations many times before, and they thought they knew the proper way to respond. Amara stepped outside to stretch her legs, carrying her cup of coffee carefully. She didn't notice that Thomas and Kevin were now approaching her. They came quickly, looking serious and tense. Amara smiled politely, ready to greet anyone with kindness. She had always believed that a friendly attitude could solve many misunderstandings. Thomas stopped near her and spoke in a sharp tone. "Excuse me, ma'am, you cannot park here. Move your car now." His voice carried authority, and he expected her to comply without question. Kevin stood slightly behind, watching her closely, prepared to support his partner. They thought their approach was normal, but in their minds they were already seeing themselves as enforcing the rules. Amara looked at them calmly. Her eyes were steady and her voice was gentle. "I'm sorry if I caused any trouble. I did not notice the spot," she said. She smiled politely, hoping to ease the tension. She believed that explaining the situation calmly would be enough. She did not raise her voice. She did not appear angry. She simply wanted to clarify. Thomas, however, was already annoyed. He did not listen carefully. Instead of giving her a chance to explain, he reached out and lightly slapped her on the arm, thinking it would make her move faster. Kevin nodded in agreement, as if this small action was normal procedure. They thought it was harmless, but they did not realize that they had misjudged the situation entirely. Amara froze for a moment. She looked at Thomas with wide eyes, surprised by the sudden action. She felt the slap but did not react with anger. Instead, she took a deep breath, kept her posture straight, and smiled slightly. Her calmness was like a wave that suddenly made the officers pause. They had expected fear, surprise, or anger, but she did none of those. She simply stood tall, confident in herself. Then Amara said clearly, "I'm the new chief of police." Her words were calm but carried weight. Thomas and Kevin stopped immediately. They blinked, confused and shocked. Their minds raced as they tried to process what she had just said. The woman they thought was just another driver in their way was actually the leader of the entire department. They felt a wave of disbelief and embarrassment. Amara continued to look at them steadily, showing no anger, no rush, only calm confidence. She let a few seconds pass, giving them time to understand the mistake. The slap they had given her suddenly seemed foolish in their eyes. They realized they had judged someone too quickly and acted before knowing the full situation. Thomas cleared his throat, finally finding words. We didn't know," he said quietly, his voice softer than before. Kevin nodded, looking down, ashamed. Amara nodded slightly, showing that she understood, but she also wanted them to see the lesson clearly. She believed that mistakes could teach people if handled with patience and calmness. Amara then took a step back and gestured toward her car. "It's okay. Let's just remember that respect comes first and assumptions can be wrong," she said. Her calm words made a big impression. Thomas and Kevin realized that authority was not about quick reactions or showing force. True authority was about respect, understanding, and proper judgment. The officers nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and embarrassment. Amara turned and walked back toward the cafe, her posture confident, her mind calm. She had handled the situation without anger, and she had already begun teaching a lesson simply by being herself. Thomas and Kevin watched her go, understanding that this day would be unforgettable. Thomas and Kevin stood frozen for a few seconds, staring at Amara as she walked back toward the cafe. Their minds were racing. They had confronted a driver they thought was ordinary, and now they had discovered she was the new chief of police. The realization hit them like a wave. They felt embarrassed, not just for the misunderstanding but for their quick judgment and impulsive actions. Amara returned to the cafe counter as if nothing unusual had happened. She ordered another coffee to go and spoke kindly with the barista, who smiled at her warmly. Her calm and confident demeanor made the officers' earlier assumptions look even more foolish. They exchanged nervous glances, silently acknowledging that they had made a mistake. Thomas was the first to speak, his voice low and hesitant. I didn't know. We thought—" He stopped, realizing that words could not undo what had happened. Kevin shifted uneasily, rubbing the back of his neck. Neither of them had ever felt such a mix of surprise and guilt. They had always followed rules and acted confidently, but now they were caught off guard by someone they had underestimated. Amara turned her head slightly and smiled in a calm, reassuring way. She did not look angry. She did not raise her voice. Her smile was not mocking. It was confident and kind. She wanted the officers to understand that respect and communication were far more important than showing force or power. She spoke slowly, her voice carrying both authority and patience. "I understand that mistakes happen, but it is important to think before acting. Respect is always the first step in any interaction." Thomas and Kevin nodded slowly. The weight of her words sank in. They realized that their approach had been wrong from the start. They had assumed she would be intimidated and respond with fear, but she had shown nothing but calmness and confidence. That simple reaction taught them more than a lecture ever could. Kevin cleared his throat and said, "We should apologize, ma'am. We didn't mean to disrespect you." Amara nodded, appreciating their sincerity. She believed in second chances and in teaching lessons through understanding, not punishment. "Thank you," she said gently. "Apologies are important, but learning from mistakes is even more important. Let's make sure this does not happen again." The officers felt a mix of relief and renewed respect. They had confronted someone with authority, expecting compliance, and instead had met a leader who embodied the values they were supposed to uphold. Amara had shown them that true leadership came from calmness, fairness, and confidence, not from making quick assumptions. As she turned to leave the cafe, Amara glanced at Thomas and Kevin once more. She wanted them to remember this moment not as shameful but as a lesson. "I hope this helps you understand the importance of patience and respect. Your actions reflect your judgment, and judgment shapes the trust people have in you," she said. Thomas and Kevin watched her walk away, feeling a sense of admiration. They had always respected rank and experience, but now they understood that leadership was more than just a position. It was about character, understanding, and the ability to handle situations calmly. They realized that the lesson Amara had taught them in just a few minutes would stay with them for years. The rest of the morning passed quietly. Thomas and Kevin went about their duties, but their thoughts kept returning to Amara and the calm way she had handled the situation. They had been shocked, yes, but the shock was mixed with a deep sense of respect. They promised themselves that they would approach every situation in the future with patience, understanding, and care. Amara returned to her car, ready to drive to the police station. She felt a sense of satisfaction, not because of the incident itself, but because she had turned a misunderstanding into a learning opportunity. She had shown that authority could be exercised with respect, and she had begun to inspire her officers simply by being confident, composed, and fair. As she drove toward the station, she thought about the work ahead. She knew there would be challenges, but she also knew that small moments like the one at the cafe could make a big difference. She was ready to lead, ready to guide, and ready to show that leadership was about more than rules. It was about people, understanding, and respect. After the cafe incident, Thomas and Kevin returned to their patrol car in silence. Neither of them spoke at first. The quiet was filled with thought, reflection, and a little embarrassment. Thomas tapped his fingers nervously on the steering wheel, while Kevin stared out the window thinking deeply. The words Amara had spoken echoed in their minds. Respect first. Patience before action. Leadership is about calmness and fairness. Thomas finally broke the silence. "You know, Kevin, I think we underestimated her," he said quietly. Kevin nodded slowly, still thoughtful. "Yes, she didn't react with anger. She didn't yell. And somehow she made us feel small in a way, not in a bad way, but in a way that made us see our mistake." They realized that their quick assumptions and hasty actions had almost caused a bigger problem. They had acted impulsively without knowing the full situation. They remembered the moment when Amara had said, "I'm the new chief of police." That calm statement had shifted everything. In just a few words, she had changed their perspective. They realized that authority was not about being loud or forceful. Authority was about understanding, confidence, and fairness, and she had shown all of that in a single encounter. Kevin sighed. "I think we need to change the way we handle situations like this. We can't just assume things or act before we know the facts." "She showed us that," Thomas agreed. "Yes, we need to be more patient, more careful, and we need to treat everyone with respect no matter what. That is what leadership really is." They both felt a new determination to improve. As they drove through the streets, their thoughts were focused on the lessons they had just learned. They began to notice small details around them: the people walking to work, the children playing in the parks, the shopkeepers opening their stores. They realized that every interaction mattered. Every person deserved respect, and every decision they made could affect someone's life. When they returned to the station, the atmosphere inside felt different. They felt a little nervous walking past other officers, thinking about the morning's events. But they also felt inspired. They wanted to be better officers. They wanted to reflect the values that Amara had shown them. calmness, fairness, and understanding. They knew it would take effort, but they were ready to start. Amara arrived at the station shortly after. She walked through the front doors with a confident, calm step. Officers greeted her warmly. Some had already heard about the cafe incident and were curious. But Amara did not make it about embarrassment or blame. She believed in teaching lessons through example, not through criticism. She called Thomas and Kevin into her office later in the morning. They entered nervously but respectfully. Amara gestured for them to sit and smiled gently. "I want to talk about what happened today," she said. "It is not about punishment. It is about understanding and learning. You both acted quickly, but you didn't have all the facts. That is something we all must be careful about." Thomas nodded. Kevin listened intently. They realized that Amara was not angry. She was guiding them, helping them understand how to become better officers. She continued, "Leadership is about thinking before acting, about treating everyone with respect, and about being calm in every situation. Mistakes can teach us, but only if we learn from them." The officers exchanged glances. They felt grateful for her words. They had expected reprimands or lectures, but instead, they received understanding and guidance. It was a lesson they would remember forever. They understood that authority was not just about rules or power. It was about character, fairness, and patience. After the meeting, Thomas and Kevin walked back to their patrol duties with a new sense of purpose. They felt motivated to do better, not just because they were told to, but because they wanted to. Amara's calm, composed approach had inspired them. They realized that small moments, like the encounter at the cafe, could teach the biggest lessons if handled the right way. That day, they began to think differently. They began to see that respect and patience were not weaknesses but strengths. They felt that they could be better officers and better people. And they knew that with Amara guiding them, their department could become stronger, fairer, and more respected by the community. After the morning's events, Amara felt it was important to take action beyond words. She believed that lessons were more meaningful when they were followed by practical steps. She wanted Thomas and Kevin, and all officers in the department, to understand teamwork, professionalism, and how to handle situations with care. Leadership, she knew, was not just about giving instructions. It was about setting examples. Amara called Thomas and Kevin into her office later that afternoon. The two officers walked in quietly, still carrying the nervous energy from the cafe incident. Amara smiled warmly and gestured for them to sit. "I want to do more than just discuss what happened today," she said. "I want us to work together on understanding respect, patience, and professionalism. Every action we take as officers reflects on the department and the community." Thomas and Kevin listened intently. They had expected scolding or a lecture, but Amara's calm, confident approach immediately put them at ease. She did not want to shame them, she wanted to guide them. "We will start with a small exercise," she explained. "I want you to observe your surroundings on your patrols and think about how your actions affect others. Notice the people around you and consider how they might feel when we interact with them." The officers nodded. It was simple yet powerful advice. They realized that the cafe incident had already taught them this lesson, but Amara's approach gave it structure. She continued, "Next, we will discuss teamwork. Each officer must support one another and communicate clearly. Mistakes happen, but learning together makes us stronger. No one should feel embarrassed for a mistake, but we must understand how to prevent it in the future." Over the next few hours, Amara guided Thomas and Kevin through a series of discussions and exercises. They practiced scenarios where patience and careful observation were essential. Amara emphasized communication and listening skills. She asked questions like, "How would you approach someone who seems upset?" Or "What is the first step before making a decision in the field?" Thomas and Kevin found themselves thinking in new ways. Amara also shared her vision for the department. She spoke about fairness, understanding, and building trust with the community. She believed that officers should not only enforce rules, but also inspire respect and cooperation. She told stories of positive interactions and explained how calm leadership could prevent misunderstandings before they grew into problems. The officers began to see that her leadership was not just a title, it was a way of thinking and acting. Thomas spoke up quietly. "I think I understand now. It's not about acting fast or showing authority. It's about thinking carefully, being respectful, and communicating clearly." Amara nodded and smiled. "Exactly. That is what makes an officer and a department strong. Mistakes teach us, but learning from them teaches even more. Kevin added, I never realized that small actions, like how we approach someone, can make such a difference. Today really opened my eyes. Amara responded, every interaction matters. Every moment is an opportunity to show respect, understanding, and professionalism. By the end of the afternoon, Thomas and Kevin felt inspired. They had started the day with embarrassment and confusion, but now they felt a sense of purpose. They realized that Amara had turned what could have been a negative experience into a valuable lesson. They were not only learning how to be better officers, but also how to contribute to a stronger, fairer department. Amara smiled as she watched them leave her office. She knew that true leadership was about creating opportunities for growth. She had shown that mistakes were not failures, but chances to learn and improve. Thomas and Kevin were already beginning to change their approach, and she felt confident that the department as a whole would benefit from this shift. As the day ended, Amara walked through the station, greeting officers and staff warmly. The atmosphere felt lighter, more positive. She had started small, but the ripple effect of patience, respect, and guidance was already beginning to spread. She knew that consistent effort would build a department where every officer and citizen felt valued and understood. The following days in the police department felt different. Amara's calm and fair leadership began to influence everyone. Officers noticed small changes in themselves and in the way their colleagues interacted. Even Thomas and Kevin felt more aware and thoughtful during their duties. The lessons from the cafe incident and Amara's guidance had started to take root. Amara organized daily briefings to encourage communication and teamwork. She would start each meeting by asking officers to share positive stories from their patrols. These stories could be small moments, helping someone with directions, listening to a concern, or solving a minor problem with care. She emphasized that every interaction mattered, and that officers should act with patience and understanding. Thomas found himself speaking more during these briefings. He shared a story about helping an elderly woman cross the street safely. Kevin added a story about assisting a lost child find their parent in the park. Each story was met with smiles and applause. Amara praised their efforts not for recognition, but to highlight the importance of thoughtful actions. Slowly, the officers began to notice the impact of kindness and professionalism. Amara also introduced small exercises to help officers practice empathy. She asked them to imagine themselves in the shoes of the people they encountered. How would you feel if you were misunderstood or treated unfairly? She would ask. Officers thought deeply and shared their perspectives. These exercises helped them understand that their actions could affect people in ways they had never considered before. The change was most visible in Thomas and Kevin. They had started the week feeling embarrassed and unsure after the cafe incident, but now they were becoming role models for others. They approached every situation with caution, patience, and respect. They communicated better with the public and with their fellow officers. Even minor decisions were made with careful thought, ensuring fairness and understanding. Amara continued to lead by example. She walked through the station every day, greeting officers, listening to concerns, and offering guidance. Her calm demeanor encouraged others to act in the same way. Officers began to solve problems through discussion instead of rushing to conclusions. Mistakes were no longer met with harsh criticism, but with understanding and an opportunity to learn. One afternoon, Thomas and Kevin were assigned to patrol a busy neighborhood. A crowd had gathered near a local market, and the officers noticed some tension as people tried to navigate the narrow streets. Thomas remembered Amara's advice and slowed down. He communicated calmly with the crowd, guiding them politely to make room. Kevin observed and offered assistance, ensuring that everyone felt respected. By the end of the patrol, the situation was handled smoothly, without stress or conflict. When they returned to the station, both officers felt proud. They realized that leadership and patience could prevent problems before they happened. They understood that authority was not about force or fear, but about respect, communication, and fairness. Amara noticed their success and gave them a warm smile. She did not need to say much. Her approval and calm presence were enough to reinforce their confidence. Over the next few weeks, the changes continued. Officers were more thoughtful, respectful, and supportive of one another. They shared lessons learned, offered guidance, and celebrated small victories together. The station had a new energy, one built on understanding, empathy, and teamwork. Amara had created a culture where every officer felt valued and every action mattered. The city began to notice the difference as well. Citizens commented on the friendly and professional behavior of officers in the neighborhood. Compliments reached the station about how officers listened, helped, and treated everyone with respect. Amara knew that these small interactions reflected the changes she had encouraged. Leadership, she thought, was about influencing behavior positively, one moment at a time. For Thomas and Kevin, the transformation was personal as well as professional. They had learned a lesson that would guide them for the rest of their careers. They were no longer just following rules, they were leading with care and understanding. The cafe incident had seemed embarrassing at first, but it had become the catalyst for a positive change that affected not only them, but the entire department. Amara smiled quietly as she reviewed the day's reports. She knew that true leadership required patience, consistency, and fairness. She also knew that real change started with small steps. The department was beginning a new chapter, and she felt confident that the future would be brighter, stronger, and more respectful for everyone. Weeks passed since the cafe incident, and Amara's leadership continued to make a positive impact. Officers who had once been impatient and reactive were now thoughtful and respectful. Thomas and Kevin in particular had become examples for others. They remembered the lessons from that morning clearly and applied them in every situation, both on patrol and at the station. One morning, the department held a small meeting to review community feedback. Amara stood at the front smiling as she read aloud some of the comments from citizens. People had noticed the change in behavior and professionalism of the officers. A local shopkeeper had written about how an officer had helped a customer solve a problem with patience. A parent had shared a story of how an officer assisted a lost child with care and calmness. Amara paused and looked at Thomas and Kevin, who were sitting in the front row. Their faces reflected quiet pride and humility. The officers began to understand that recognition did not come from force or authority, but from respect, service, and thoughtfulness. The cafe incident, once a moment of embarrassment, had set the foundation for this change. Amara had turned a misunderstanding into a lesson that now benefited the entire department. Her calm approach and focus on teaching through example had created a culture that people both inside and outside the department admired. Thomas spoke quietly to Kevin after the meeting. "I can't believe how far we've come in such a short time," he said. Kevin nodded, smiling. "Yes, I never thought a single moment could teach such a big lesson. Amara really knows how to guide people." They realized that the respect they were now earning from citizens and colleagues was a direct result of their changed behavior. They had learned to act with care, to think before making decisions, and to communicate clearly in every situation. Amara continued to encourage officers to share positive stories and lessons learned from the field. She asked them to reflect on their interactions and discuss how they could improve. This simple routine strengthened the team and built trust among the officers. Even minor actions like greeting people politely or listening carefully became part of the culture. Officers began to feel more confident, knowing they were making a real difference in the community. The department soon received a formal letter of appreciation from the city council. Citizens had written in to praise the professionalism and kindness of the officers. The letter specifically mentioned how leadership and teamwork had improved interactions between the police and the community. Amara shared the letter with the officers during a meeting. She explained that this recognition was not about her alone. It reflected the collective effort of the entire team, including Thomas and Kevin. The officers were proud, but more importantly, they felt inspired to continue growing. They understood that leadership, respect, and patience were values to practice every day. They had seen firsthand how small actions could lead to big improvements in the community. Amara's calm guidance had not only helped them learn from their mistakes, but had also given them the tools to create positive change wherever they went. One afternoon, Thomas and Kevin were on patrol near the park when they noticed a group of children struggling to carry their sports equipment. Without hesitation, they stepped forward and helped the children. The children smiled and thanked them warmly. Thomas and Kevin exchanged a glance and smiled quietly. They knew that this moment, like many others, reflected the lessons they had learned from Amara. Word of the positive changes spread quickly. Other departments in the city began to take note of the approach Amara had introduced. Her calm, respectful leadership and focus on teaching through example became a model for others. Thomas and Kevin often shared their story, including the moment at the cafe, emphasizing how patience, communication, and respect could make a real difference in policing. By now, the officers realized that recognition was not about being perfect, but about growth and learning. They felt proud of their progress and were motivated to continue improving. Amara had shown them that leadership was about more than rules. It was about creating a culture where every action mattered, every interaction counted, and every person was treated with dignity. As the sun set over the city, Amara walked through the station one last time that day. She noticed the smiles, the chatter, and the sense of pride among the officers. She knew that the department was on the right path. The cafe incident had been the beginning of a journey, and the journey had led to recognition, respect, and a stronger, more connected team. Weeks turned into months, and the police department continued to grow stronger under Amara's leadership. Officers had become more thoughtful, careful, and respectful in their work. Thomas and Kevin were no longer just learning. They were leading by example. They remembered the cafe incident vividly, and it had become a story they often shared to teach others about patience, respect, and calmness. Amara walked through the station one morning, observing her team. Everyone was focused, yet the atmosphere felt lighter, positive, and cooperative. Officers greeted each other warmly, shared information, and helped one another without being asked. The change was not sudden, but consistent effort had created a new culture. Small moments of understanding had built trust, and trust had grown into teamwork. Thomas approached Amara with a thoughtful expression. "Chief, I want to thank you," he said sincerely. "I never realized how much a calm approach could change everything. I feel like I understand my role better now, and I want to keep improving." Kevin nodded beside him. "Yes, we have learned a lot from that day. It's not just about rules or authority. It's about how we treat people. You showed us that leadership is about example and respect." Amara smiled warmly. "Thank you, both of you. That is exactly what I hope to achieve. Leadership is not about showing power. It is about guiding, teaching, and inspiring. You have taken the lesson to heart, and now you are helping others do the same. That is real progress." Her words carried calm authority, and the officers felt a sense of pride. Later that day, the department held a small ceremony to celebrate progress. Amara recognized officers who had shown exceptional patience, communication, and teamwork. Thomas and Kevin received acknowledgement for their growth and for setting an example for their colleagues. The officers clapped not just for the recognition, but because they understood the value of the lessons behind it. Amara spoke to the group, her voice steady and kind. "Every day we have choices in how we act. We can choose to act with patience, fairness, and respect, or we can act impulsively. The choice affects not only the people we serve, but also the strength of our team. Leadership is about making the right choice, even in small moments." The officers listened attentively, absorbing the wisdom in her words. After the ceremony, Thomas and Kevin returned to their duties with renewed motivation. They approached every interaction thoughtfully, remembering the lesson Amara had taught them. They encouraged younger officers, guided them calmly, and shared their experiences. They realized that mistakes were not failures. They were opportunities to learn and improve. The city noticed the changes as well. People spoke positively about the department, commenting on how approachable and helpful the officers were. Parents, shopkeepers, and students appreciated the thoughtful way the officers interacted with them. Amara knew that building respect required consistency, and she was proud to see the department earning it every day. One afternoon, Amara reflected on the journey. She thought about the cafe incident, which had seemed like a small, even embarrassing moment at first. Yet that moment had sparked change. It had reminded everyone, especially Thomas and Kevin, that true leadership and authority were built on respect, calmness, and understanding. She smiled quietly, knowing that even small actions could teach powerful lessons when handled wisely. As the day ended, Amara walked through the empty station. The sounds of the city faded, but the energy of growth, respect, and teamwork remained. She knew that the lessons learned would continue to guide the department for years to come. Leadership, she reflected, was not about being noticed. It was about making a difference, one decision, one action, and one person at a time. Thomas and Kevin left the station that evening walking with confidence and pride. They had learned a lesson that went beyond rules or ranks. They understood that respect, patience, and calmness were the keys to true leadership. They knew that their actions reflected not only themselves but the entire department. The cafe incident, once a moment of surprise and embarrassment, had become a story of growth, understanding, and positive change. Amara looked out the window of her office, watching the city lights glow. She knew the journey of leadership was never complete, but she also knew that with patience, respect, and thoughtful guidance, every challenge could be met and every lesson could be learned. The department had grown, the officers had grown, and the community had noticed. And all of it began with one calm, confident moment that taught a lesson everyone would never forget.